Hi, this is Jen Rubin, editor-in-chief of The Contrarian. Delighted to welcome Daniella Ballou-Aares, who is the CEO of the Leadership Network. Welcome, Daniella.
Thanks so much. Glad to be here, Jen.
What is the Leadership Network?
The Leadership Now Project is a membership organization of business leaders committed to protecting American democracy and working to create a positive vision for the future of this country.
How does democracy and the rule of law impact business? Let's just talk about that fundamental question. Why do businesses care if we have courts that operate rule of law, predictability, and the rest?
I mean, obviously in multifaceted ways, but if we get specific about what it means for business, for rule of law to erode, for instance, in 2023, we did an amicus brief on the case between Disney and DeSantis and the government of Florida, saying that the free speech and the respect for contracts, punishment of free speech by government, and the erosion of respect for contracts, reliability of contracts was a danger for business. Now, that feels like a very small example in the current context, but I think it speaks to the basics of what business depends on, both in terms of the specifics of their individual operations and what they expect in terms of regulatory environment, as well as the bigger picture we're seeing now, which is a massive uncertainty in policy decision-making, particularly around tariffs, as we've seen recently.
So the tariffs, we were all over the map. We've started, we've stopped, we've started, they went up, they came down a little bit. How is the business community reacting? Are they relieved that some of the tariffs have come down? Are they kind of frozen in place? What's the general reaction at this point?
Well, I think first, the conduct of the policymaking around tariffs was obviously jarring to many in the business community. The idea that there was some formula that was announced, that all of a sudden there were these massive tariffs across many countries all at once, I think was unexpected in terms of the scale and the irresponsible nature of it. I think it was obviously a relief to see some of those tariffs come down. One of Leadership Now's members, for instance, in Wisconsin is Tom Florsheim, who runs Florsheim Shoes in the Waco group. They and the entire footwear industry immediately responded to the tariffs, saying this is could shut down major portions of the American footwear industry because, of course, they source their materials from China, from Vietnam, et cetera. So, I mean, it was not just the markets, but it was real businesses that were going to be impacted and real prices that would go up for consumers. So I think there's relief in it going down, but there's still so much uncertainty about where the tariffs are going to go. Obviously, there's still the trade war with China and how that relationship's going to evolve and how our economic relationship's going to evolve. So I don't think you could argue that business feels like everything's now okay after that episode.
So when business looks at the landscape now, how do they plan whether they want to create a new warehouse or they want to break into a new market? There's such uncertainty now. Are they just waiting and seeing? Is that kind of the approach?
I think the evidence would be there's a lot of waiting, seeing happening. I think that you see that in M&A, right? And just there was an expectation with the Trump administration that even for those who were certainly not happy that Trump had won or they had concerns about him, there was the expectation that things like regulatory barriers to mergers and acquisitions or would reduce, and this would create some new opportunities. But I think that's certainly on hold. Certainly investing in any kind of manufacturing operation, investing where in the world do you invest? You know, what are you going to invest in the US and somewhere else? How are you going to build your team? I think on a micro level and a macro level, it's really just creating a lot of paralysis, I think, in the business community.
Businesses also rely on other institutions in civil society. They rely on law firms and they rely on universities and colleges to produce an educated workforce. What's been the reaction when law firms have capitulated. Some of those obviously have a whole array of business clients, and the reaction of universities, both to the really massive cuts that they may face in terms of research, but also this imposition of state control over private institutions.
Look, I think this administration has taken on many fronts at once, and law, the tariffs, and universities are certainly not unrelated fronts, as you've said, that they've taken on. And I don't think it's an accident that you have seen more robust pushback from the universities after the episode on tariffs and with the law firms. Because if the law firms they weren't the first to be attacked, others, but let's say one of the first, like a large scale kind of business interest, the conduct of the firms who did make deals with the administration influence a whole set of others that said, well, we don't want to be in that same position, and we see where that all goes. So I think business leaders are very aware of what is happening in those other spheres and are very connected to it. We had multiple members who went to their law firms and said, look, if we do not expect you to make a deal with the federal government, we will maintain our business with you, even if there is a threat, an undue and unlawful threat from the federal government. So I think we've actually seen a lot of business leaders who said, the law firms that caved here and made a deal, what does that say for how they're going to represent my business in a in a difficult context? So I think, and then the university piece is profound. I mean, American business depends on a highly educated workforce. They depend on research that these institutions deliver. And the idea that there's a kind of willful effort to destroy that asset that our country has, I think is very disturbing to certainly our members and networks, and I think should concern all of the business community.
What do Republicans in Congress, in state houses, in state legislatures say to your members who have who have political affairs people who go to the Hill, who go to other offices and say, listen, this is a problem for me? Are they hiding under their desks? Are they responsive to your concerns? What are they saying to your members?
I think they're not unsympathetic to the concerns. I feel, obviously it varies. The feedback I've had as well is they have not felt that they've had influence over administration activities in these areas, at least some, and have felt very much at risk. I mean, most visibly by Elon Musk's calls to primary anyone who goes against the administration. So I think there's the degree of coercion that the administration needs to use to get to line up support within Congress, within the business community, within law firms, is indicative of a lack of support for their positions. I don't need to tell you that, but I think that, so I think it's a question. I do think that the degree that they have flouted the rule of law in the realms we're talking about here and in areas beyond that around illegal deportations, around what may come in terms of nonprofits and foundations and C3 status. Obviously, they've already gone after Harvard's 3C status, or they're discussing it. I think all of those things are, just collectively demonstrating what this administration is trying to do. And I think Republicans in Congress, if they see enough pushback and risk, are not impossible allies ultimately.
Yesterday, the chairman of the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell, made some tough statements about the tariffs. He said that it was obviously going to lead to inflation. He expressed concern that the dual mandate of the Fed, which is both to keep unemployment low and inflation low, is put at risk. If Trump were to go so far as to fire Jerome Powell, what would be the reaction of your members, and what economic sort of meltdown could we expect if suddenly the central bank is no longer seen as an independent entity?
Look, I think it's hard to fully predict any one action and what that's going to do. So certainly that would be very concerning, and you would see pushback on that decision. I do think ultimately, when we think about what is required to restore a respect for the rule of law in this administration, which I think it's going to be coalitions that are required to do that across within business and across industries, multi-company, but then also across sectors. So I think what's on our mind is, where are the places and moments that can bring the broadest coalition? Tariffs did see industry associations, that's a part of the coalition, come together in a certain way. I think a move around the Fed would see, particularly in the financial community, but I think we have so many things that are at risk right now. What we do really need to be planning for and considering is, what's the kind of broad coalitions that can restore respect for the rule of law in our country, because we know that that's what Americans actually want. That's what business wants.
Right.
And we're in a worrying place across the board.
So, as we reach the end of our time, what advice would you give, and are you giving to your members and other businesses about how they talk about this connection between a successful capitalist system, free markets, and the rule of law? How do they explain this to their shareholders, to their employees, to their customers? What's the message that is the most productive for business leaders to be sending out?
I think we've always talked about the importance of democracy. That was a, founding, what animated some of the founding of this organization. But what we found was so important, and starting over the past couple of years and now, is being really clear about what that looks like from a rule of law perspective, and what it means when a couple of things happen. When there's not respect for contracts, regulation is made on a whim, based on personal preferences, that markets can't work based on who's the most innovative, effective, a more meritocratic capitalist environment. And it's driven by preferences, cronyism, and whims of leaders. And I think the case study of the tariffs is one of the whim of the president and some of his advisors being unchecked by the many checks that he has in the White House, that he has in Congress, et cetera, and the agencies. So, I think that tariffs is a case study, and then what it means for your business to no longer operate in a system where you can predict outcomes based on what's at least reasonably rational from the government about what's good for your industry. And it just comes down to personal preferences and who writes the biggest check. And that gets pretty old pretty quickly, and very bad for a thriving, innovative capitalist system pretty quickly.
Well, you make a point that we like to make here at the Contrarian, and that is, it takes all aspects of society: labor unions, businesses, universities, lawyers, individuals, and that if we collectively insist upon the rule of law, we'll be in a much stronger position than if we allow the administration to serially go through and pick one company, one university, one law firm off at a time. So there is strength in numbers. So thank you so much, Daniella, for coming on. It is important to remember that the business community is a vital part of the pro-democracy movement. And thank you for all you're doing. We'll look forward to having you back again.
Great. Thank you so much, Jen. A pleasure to be here, and thanks for all of your work.